guidelines in terms of what are the big expectations from COP28, which will begin, as you know, in the next 2 days in Dubai. To also release a very important report of ours on extreme weather events in India. It's an annual report. It helps us to track what is happening and gives you a scale of the changes that there are. And that's really my first question, my first point, as I look to the outcomes of Dubai. Firstly, as Dubai COP is coming at a time when the world is acutely aware of the impacts of climate change. There is not anymore any ifs and buts and maybes when it comes to climate change. We know that the impacts are happening. Each year, the planet gets warmer. Each year, new records are broken. And each year, we know that the pain of the impacts of climate change are being felt by the poorest in our world. So at the Dubai COP, there are some developments that we believe at CSE are critical for us to watch out for us to see how they go and to make sure actually that they go well. And the reason for this is that there is just too much at stake in the world today. The world is divided. The world is more and more polarized. It's distracted between the wars and all the other things that are breaking around us. And yet, each year when we meet at the climate conference, we are also acutely aware of the fact that climate change is about global cooperation, that you have to have a multilateral process in which countries meet, countries decide on what is the framework for climate action, and they are held to account for the actions that they have promised and the actions that they have not delivered on. So it is, in spite of the divisions in the world, we have no choice but to come together. And that's my first big message takeaway from the Dubai COP, that we have no choice but to cooperate and but to come together, however divided the world may be. So the few big outcomes, which my colleagues will discuss with you, but from my point of view, the biggest outcome is going to be what is the stocktake that the world will come up with in Dubai to assess where are we today and where we need to go. Now, the reason this global stocktake, as it is called, is so important is because it is not just as a litany of what hasn't happened, but as a framing of what must happen. It is the post-Paris framing to bring countries together for an ambitious but an equitable outcome. And that's the bottom line. Because we know in Paris, there was a measure of ambition. The world agreed that we would try and keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees centigrade rise. But we know that the framing of the Paris Agreement did not make for cooperation, did not make for financial flows, did not make for the transformation that needs to happen in our parts of the world. We need development. We need energy. 70% of the world's population still does not have access to energy. So the fact is that we access to development. So it is a fact that there will be increased energy used, and that will increase emissions in the world. And that's the big discussion that must take place in the stocktake so that we can come up with an agreement in which how will the world, which is already polluted, cut, and what will happen to the rest of the world, which needs to grow. It is a revisiting of the 1992 agreement on climate change. It is a revisiting of the Paris Agreement to strengthen it, to make it more equitable, to make sure that there is cooperation so that we can move forward in a way that all countries move forward. And that's really what we hope will be the big outcome out of COP. But I have my colleagues who will tell you, Avantika will explain to you the different issues out there, and then my colleagues here who have been following these developments are here to answer any questions that you may have. But first, Rajat, if we could release, and I will hold it up because that's the only way we could release it right now, is our India 2023 report. I'm not sure how clear it is, but when you show it in your slide, I think it will help to explain. This is a critical report as it helps us to understand, as I said, the scale, because we know that extreme weather events are happening. We know that we cannot do development the way we were doing in the past. From every disaster that we see in India, in Africa, and right now that we have seen last week, even in the state of Gujarat, we know that we cannot afford this, the development pattern of the past. We also know that we are suffering losses and damages that need to be accounted for. That's one of the big issues that will come up at COP. So, Rajat, please give us a presentation on the report, your findings, and then I will ask others to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible? And is my screen visible as well?
Yes, but you can make it full screen, I think.
Yeah, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what I'll talk about is primarily the book that ma'am just released. And this is basically a book on extreme weather events that happen in India daily, on a daily basis. So the unit that we use is the number of days when extreme weather events have been recorded in the country. So what we will cover today in the next 5-7 minutes is how we get the numbers, what the report this year tells us. And we started this report last year. So we have a comparison between what happened last year in terms of extreme weather events in India and how it was different this year compared to last year. So these are the three things that we will quickly run through. So first is, from where do we get our numbers? And this is very critical. So there are three sources that we look at. The first is the India Meteorological Department. So in IMD comes up with two distinct reports. One is the daily press releases that it comes out with, which tells us about the happening of extreme weather events. So it basically talks about what has happened in the past 24 hours. So we look at it on a daily basis. Along with that, IMD also comes out with something called a climate summary for the month. So this is the document that we look at for understanding the amount of loss and damage that happens with this. Interestingly, this document also relies on media reportage to understand the loss and damage part of it. Then secondly, what we also look at is the Disaster Management Division, which comes under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So they come out with something called a situation report. And this usually starts around the monsoon season. So around June is the time when it starts, and it goes till about December. So it is also a daily report that comes out with, that they come out with. And over here, they quantify the amount of loss and damage that is happening due to floods and heavy rainfall. So that is another source that we rely to come up with this report. And third, we also look at the media reports. So some of the extreme weather event types, like let's say cloudburst, is not covered in these two data sources. So we look at media reports for this, and we also rely on media reports to understand the amount of loss and damage that is coming up. So these are the three sources that we look at to come up with this report. And this year, what we found is that out of the 273, so we have looked at the time period is from January 1st, 2023 till September 30th, 2023. So there are 273 months, 273 days in there. Out of that, 235 days, which is roughly 86% of days, some part of the country has experienced an extreme weather event. So 86% of the days, some part of the country had experienced an extreme weather event. And what we also found, this is something different from last year, that all 36 states and union territories, even the ones that we normally don't consider like Dadra and Nagar Haveli or Lakshadweep or Andaman and Nicobar, so UTs, all of them had at least one day of extreme weather event this year, which basically tells us that extreme weather event is, so no part of India is immune to extreme weather events, or all of them are vulnerable to it. So that is something that we found this year. Third is amongst, so if you can also look at the map on our left, So Madhya Pradesh was the worst hit. So it recorded extreme weather events on 138 days out of 273, followed by Uttar Pradesh, that is 113 days, and finally Himachal Pradesh, that is 112 days. So these are the three most vulnerable this year. Madhya Pradesh was also the most vulnerable last year as well, even though we had Assam floods last year. So Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Himachal Pradesh are the three most vulnerable. And in fact, 6 states, they had more than 100 days of extreme weather events in this period between January and September. So there are 6 states that had more than 100 days out of the 273 days that we talked about. So if you look at the extreme weather event types, so what we have on our left is basically these are the number of days for the extreme weather event types. So lightning and storms was the most common, and so on, which happened on 176 days during this period. And lightning and storms, surprisingly, this year during the March-April period, when we see heat waves in northwestern part of India, we saw a lot of hailstorm events that happened, which led to a lot of crop damage as well. So if you look at the graph at the bottom, each of these bars, they talk about the individual day, starting from January 1st till September. And the color is coded with the extreme weather event type that you see at the top. And the length is dependent on how many states and UTs were affected by it. So roughly, if you look at here, so around 16 states and UTs had hailstorms. So this would be towards the end of March. So then over here, July. So these are all heavy rains and floods. This is the monsoon period. So this is basically how we've looked at it. And we found that from June onwards, somewhere in mid-June, for 122 consecutive days, there were extreme weather events that were reported in India. So if you look at this entire stretch over here, we've got bars on every day. So that basically means that on each day, some part of India was experiencing something abnormal in terms of weather events. And lightning and storms, as I just talked about, it was the most predominant of them, 176, followed by heavy rains, floods, and landslide, 132 days, and heat waves, 49. So what we also found is that traditionally, this is the period around March, April, mid-March to April is when heat waves is most common. But if you look at it this year, it moved into the monsoon period, whereas over here, it was much less pronounced. So which was very abnormal this year around, because hailstorms happened because of western disturbances and all. So what this actually leads to is the loss and damage part of it. So why should we really be bothered about it, or why should we worry about it? So first is the human deaths that it led to. Almost 3,000 people have already died this year due to extreme weather events. Bihar, surprisingly, has the maximum number of human deaths at 642, followed by Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and you can have a look at it. So around 3,000 people have already died because of extreme weather events this year. And these extreme weather events have also led to a crop area loss of 1.84 million hectares, with Haryana being the most prominent. 0.48 is states unknown, so it happened across multiple states. So we could not ascertain where it happened, but we know for a fact that the losses did take place because of extreme weather events. Then followed by Punjab. So this explains, or this in a way has an impact on the food security and the of the country. So crop loss was quite widespread this year because of hailstorms in April, May, and then obviously the heavy rainfalls that followed. And it also led to animal deaths. So 92.5 thousand animals died because of extreme weather events this year. So now let's have a look at, so on your right is what happened last year, 2022. On your left is what happened this year. These are daily. So if you look at it, overall lightning and storms was most pronounced. So one of the sub groupings of lightning and storm is hailstorm. So a lot of hailstorms happened over here. That is the reason why 176 days vis-a-vis 159 days in the last year. Heavy rains was much more pronounced last year. This time it's 132 days. Heat waves were much more pronounced, 66. So you can also look at visually these two graphs, and you can see the difference between the two. Overall, 241 days was what was reported during this period last year. This year, slightly less at 235 days. However, more or less, if you look at it, the pattern is quite different. So the fatalities, however, maybe because of the hailstorm that happened earlier, the fatality was much higher this year. So this year it was 2,923 vis-a-vis 2,755 the last year due to extreme weather events. And also the crop loss was somewhat comparable. So 1.84 million hectares was what was roughly lost due to extreme weather events even last year. And even this year, a similar thing happened. However, the reach or the spread this year because of the hailstorms was much wider. So last year, crop loss was reported from 15 states and UTs. This year, it went on to 20 states and UTs. So it was much more widespread in that sense. And obviously, all 36 states and UTs were affected this year, unlike last year, which was 34 states and UTs. So Ladakh was not affected last year. So, and another UT was not affected last year. So to read more about this, there are two things that you can possibly do. One is, this is a dashboard that we maintain at Down to Earth. We update this dashboard every month. So you can go over here and you can actually look at the individual numbers and you can find your own stories based on this. So you can basically, it's an interactive dashboard where you can look at the 2022 figures, you can look at individual month-wise figures and everything else. And the second thing, what we have launched today is the extreme weather events book or the report that we've come out with. This is a free to use. It's a free for download. So you can go to this CSE link and you can download it. And we have a lot of analysis that we found was very important to talk about, given the numbers that we looked at. Thanks a lot. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Rajat. Thank you very much. And so, Avantika, if I may now ask you to give a presentation, an overview of what's expected at COP, and then we will open it up to questions.
Sure, ma'am. So I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Avantika Goswami, Program Manager for Climate Change at CSE, and I'll give a brief overview of some of the big negotiation items at COP28 this year. Of course, as Sunita ma'am has already mentioned, the headline issue this year is the global stocktake. The global stocktake itself being a report card on the Paris Agreement's goals. It was enshrined in Article 14 of the Paris Agreement, and basically it aims to assess what progress we've made or haven't made on the goals of the Paris Agreement in terms of temperature targets, climate finance, climate ambition, and other targets that the Paris Agreement had outlined. So there's a snapshot here of our recent briefing paper on the global stocktake. And here, essentially, my colleague Tamanna Sengupta, who's on the call today for Q&A, has analyzed submissions made by different parties. And what we find is that there are still many points of disagreement on the global stocktake. And there's quite a lot of divergence, particularly between the global north and global south countries on a number of issues, starting from fossil fuel phase out to equity and the consideration of historical emissions. So going forward at the moment, the co-facilitators of the global stocktake have published an informal note, which has some possible elements that could be considered for the decision. The note is essentially a summary of the contributions that different parties have made on what the final outcome could look like. And the focus of negotiations at COP28 will be to agree on this proposed draft. There are 3 high-level events planned for the global stocktake in the first 2 days of COP28. And there are still a number of open questions about whether the global stocktake will lead to enhanced NDC targets or whether it will lead to implementation measures that will actually put the GST into action. So these are still questions that will be discussed at COP28. The next big ticket item is the issue of mitigation. A number of major reports that have been published just before COP28 show that we are on track with current policies, the current NDCs. We are on track to exceed more than 2 degrees of warming. And this is, of course, not in line with what the Paris Agreement has outlined. So mitigation is extremely critical in to not just reduce emissions, but also to avert the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And my colleagues, Trishant Dev and Tamanna Sengupta, will be available for questions on this topic. They've done this analysis where we have found that the global carbon budget, which is remaining for the next 9 years, the remainder for the next 9 years is 314 gigatons of carbon dioxide. But the current track on which our emissions are going, we will substantially overshoot the remaining global carbon budget. Our analysis also finds that for carbon dioxide emissions, historical polluters will continue to appropriate most of the remaining carbon budget. And this is particularly major polluter countries like the United States, European Union, and so on. Within the issue of mitigation, there are specific negotiation items at COP. The mitigation work program, which was held up at the Bonn Climate Conference on the subject of finance. Discussions on this are expected to progress, and developing countries will definitely hope that the constraints that they face in taking on more mitigation ambition will be recognized within the mitigation work program. They will also seek financial support and technology transfer in order to help them align their climate plans with their domestic development imperatives. We then come to the big issue of adaptation. On this, my colleague Akshit Sangomla is available to answer detailed questions. But essentially, the global goal on adaptation has led to a kind of a situation now where parties still do not have a common understanding of the definition of adaptation. Despite a number of workshops around the GGA framework itself is still undecided. Finance is a big topic within adaptation. The latest OECD report has shown that finance for adaptation has actually declined for the recent data set for 2021. And there's still plenty of technical work left to be done in deciding the GGA framework. The issue of loss and damage, which was essentially considered a major win for COP27, has seen some ups and downs this year. The Transitional Committee has met 5 times through this year. And although at this point, the Transitional Committee has ended with an outcome and made some recommendations to the COP and CMA, many developing country parties are not happy with the recommendations that have been made. Currently, it has been decided that the Loss and Damage Fund will be, the interim host of the Loss and Damage Fund will be the World Bank, with several conditionalities imposed on it to make sure that the fund can eventually exit from the World Bank. There have also been a lot of discussions around the eligibility of access to funds within the Loss and Damage Fund, with countries like the US wanting to narrow down the focus only to SIDS and LDCs, or particularly vulnerable countries. So definitely loss and damage, while a great win was achieved last year, it remains contentious, but a compromised outcome has been achieved for the moment. And our hope is that the next step will be the filling up of the Loss and Damage Fund with grant-based pledges from developed countries. And our 2 experts on this, Akshit Sangomla and Tamanna Sengupta, are available to answer questions. On the issue of climate finance, the latest data from the OECD suggests that the developed countries are close to meeting the goal of 100 billion, which was set out in 2009. The latest data for 2021 shows that the target has hit $89.6 billion. And they've also suggested in the latest OECD report that the data for 2022 shows that 100 billion may have been met, but that data has not been published yet. But overwhelmingly, one of our takeaways from this reporting is that there's still most of the climate finance being transferred in the form of loans as opposed to grants, which goes to increasing indebtedness of developing countries. The new climate finance goal, which is the NCQG, discussions are ongoing. And in fact, the 8th technical expert dialogue started today to deliberate on multiple aspects, starting from the composition of funds to the donor countries versus recipient countries, as well as the quantum of the overall quantum of the goal. There will be a high-level ministerial dialogue that will be conducted at COP28 to discuss the NCQG. Within climate finance, an emerging issue is around Article 2.1c. And our fact sheet on this, all of these fact sheets are available on the CSE website. It outlines the details on Article 2.1c, which deals with Paris alignment of global financial flows. There are certain developed countries like the European Union who are keen to make this a standalone agenda item at COP28, but that remains to be seen. Developing countries are very clear that they want Article 2.1c to be read along with Article 9, which discusses the transfer of finance from developed to developing countries. So this is still a contentious issue. Along with the issue of climate finance, CSE has also analyzed this larger global discussion on transforming financial systems or reforms to the global finance architecture. Our fact sheet of this, which is uploaded on the CSE website, it summarizes all the big milestone summits and conferences this year which have discussed issues like the debt crisis, the issue of MDB reform, and even discussions that the COP28 presidency is furthering on creating a finance system of the future. Our fact sheet is available online, which shows that some progress has been made on this vast and very heterogeneous issue, but a lot more momentum is required. One snapshot from the fact sheet, for example, this year, debt restructuring deals were arrived at for 3 developing countries. So we've outlined the details of those. The G20 process has outlined what progress MDBs have made on updating capital adequacy framework recommendations. So we've included those updates. So hopefully this will be a useful document. On the issue of Article 6, which deals with flexible mechanisms, my colleagues Trishant and Rohini, they have outlined in our fact sheet on this topic what the progress is under Article 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8. What we have found is that a number of bilateral deals have been signed under Article 6.2 already. Article 6.4, the supervisory body has been furthering discussions overseeing the development of this global carbon market. There are a number of modalities yet to be worked out, even though the rulebook itself was framed in 2021 when the Paris rulebook was finalized. We also believe that there needs to be more discussion on non-market approaches. Progress on this has been very limited so far, which is under Article 6.8. And there are much more detail available in the fact sheets on this particular negotiation stream. And lastly, while this is not a negotiation stream on its own, methane, or rather non-CO2 short-lived pollutants are expected to be in focus at this particular COP summit. In our fact sheet on methane, we have outlined the fact that the global methane pledge has now been signed by almost 150 countries. But when you look under the hood at the policies, the domestic policies that countries have specified, they are still extremely lacking. They're lacking in depth and specificity, as well as problems with reporting. The US has been promoting or furthering discussions on methane in a large way. And the US and China, in their recent joint statements, have announced that they will co-host a methane summit at COP28. Our fact sheet has highlighted what some top polluting countries of methane in the world have implemented or announced in terms of domestic policies on methane that we hope will be a useful guide to assess whether domestic action towards this global methane pledge is actually furthering or whether it's lacking. And we've also shone a spotlight on the top oil and gas producing companies who are major methane emitters and what kind of methane reduction targets that they have announced. So with that, I'll end my presentation and back to Sunita ma'am to start the Q&A session.
Thank you, Avantika. So I had one question in the Q&A box, which Rajit, would you take that on? Have you replied to it? On the question about how do you really assess, and that's an important question, maybe we can begin with that, is the whole question of how do you really assess whether it is related to climate change or not. This extreme weather event is related to climate change or not. And how do we not fall into the danger of saying everything is climate change, whereas this could be just weather variability. So if you could start with that, and then I will take on Mohana's Basu's question, which is on the points of negotiation.
Yes, ma'am. So there are 2-3 things that we do normally. So in the report, so there are specific definitions that IMD has come. So IMD does not have a definition for what extreme weather events is, but it has got specific definitions for each of the extreme weather event type. So that is one way to ascertain. So for heat waves, so there has to be a certain threshold beyond which, if the temperature increases there, then heat wave is, and it is also different from different parts of the country. So for plains, it is different. For hilly areas, it is different. So they have a specific definition in place. So that is one thing that needs to be looked at, and also the fact that the government of India is already monitoring it. There are obviously a lot of issues in terms of the loss and damage part of it, like we realized this year. So Madhya Pradesh is the most vulnerable in terms of the number of days when extreme weather events have been reported, which is based on different government reports. However, according to the government numbers, Madhya Pradesh has not recorded any crop loss, which is highly unlikely because hailstorms is one of the events that happened. So that is something that obviously exists, but in terms of ascertaining how varied it is. So the other thing that we also do is, which is there in the report, is, so on the one hand, we have talked about how the climate or the weather was during that month, which is also based on the IMD report. And along with that, the days when there has been some kind of excessive, let's say the months when it was excessively hot, like April this year was excessively hot. Then along with that, we see a spike in heat waves. So there is also a similar kind of correlation that you can also see in the report as well. So month-wise, we have done that correlation in terms of how the weather was and what kind of extreme weather events were reported over there.
I think the bottom line, if I may simplify what Rajit has said, is, it's all about the increased frequency and increased intensity of the events as we are beginning to see it. There is a natural variation in weather, which is something that has been recorded for many years. But today, even all Met officials agree that climate is on a roll. And, we can see the difference now, and that is attributable. And in fact, there is a science today called the attribution science, which is able to even fingerprint and tell you how much of any one event can be attributed to climate change. So the fact of the matter is, we will see more and more extreme weather events, increased frequency, intensity of unseasonal extreme weather events, and that our report only underlies how this is increasing and how there is a human toll, there is an economic toll. We're not even measuring it as good as we should, and that these are issues that need to come up at COP. Now, there's another question which Mona Basu has raised, which I think is something that we need to really give some response to and careful, is on the points of negotiations with India expected to play a key role. Who of this group would like to begin on that?
So I think India has been very active on making submissions to the global stocktake. And perhaps, Tamanna, you could talk about India's submissions here and the issues that India has highlighted.
Yes, absolutely. So India, in the global stocktake, they have raised their own submission as a country on a national level. They have also been a part of the like-minded developed countries and the group of 77 in China. Overall, the submissions under the global stocktake, under mitigation, they are part of the group asking for a focus on past gaps on climate ambition. So they want to focus on the action that has been taken so far and what that would mean in terms of an equitable access to the global carbon budget. To that end, the like-minded developed countries have also raised an agenda item on operationalizing equity and the common but differentiated responsibilities principle throughout the negotiations. So we expect that to be a key point raised by India in all of the negotiation points as well. Then under adaptation, India has been one of the countries pushing for double adaptation finance. However, with the release of the recent adaptation gap report this year, we've seen that double adaptation finance may no longer be enough. So there might be a push for more heightened goal over there. We also have seen India in the loss and damage negotiations. They have been a part of the developing country group where they've been asking for all developing countries to be eligible to the fund. Although the fund itself has not been under the global stocktaking negotiations, we do expect as part of the developing countries, there might be a final push for this specific language to be included in the fund draft, and also for the World Bank, the conditions set for the World Bank as an intermediary host to be accepted. And then finally, under finance, India, as historically, it has also this time pushed for more reliable public finance by developed countries, and they still want the developed countries to take the lead in enabling finance, not only under the global stocktake, but also in other negotiation tracks such as the Global Goal on Adaptation and the Loss and Damage Fund. Yes, if I've missed anything out, Avantika.
Yeah. Just one small point to add is India is one of the countries that has highlighted on Article 2.1c about how it shouldn't be top-down prescriptions, but should focus on nationally determined plans that then require funding. So it's been one of the few developing countries that have highlighted this kind of risk of having top-down prescriptions if Article 2.1c is broadened and applied in a certain interpretation that developed countries are pushing. So
let me explain this Article 2.1c a little bit, and just unpack it a little. So Article 2.1c is becoming a rather hot potato, and it's something that gets missed, and it's important for us to understand the implications of it. So it basically is about a Paris-aligned finance. Now, technically, that sounds good. I mean, that you would like all finance that comes in to be aligned to the Paris goals. And the Paris goals are low carbon, sustainable growth, keeping the world below 1.5 degrees centigrade rise. I mean, it is good. The problem with it is how the interpretation of this, what is a Paris goal, will happen, and who will determine it, and who will then therefore decide on whether a finance can be given to a country or not, if it is if it is aligned to the Paris goals or not. And this, because it is not just about climate-related finance, it could be about all finance. So which means that any development, infrastructure, health-related, education-related global finance could be linked to what could be called Paris-aligned. Now, all this means that who will decide? And that's the big issue that would become an important issue. And I think, for climate change, from all of us, we do believe that action is needed. We need finance. We need finance beyond what is called climate finance and grant, low concessional finance. But we do not want that finance to be further come with conditionalities, and for a supranational government to decide what is best for countries of the South. And I think that's something of great danger. I do not think it'll lead to better mitigation efforts as well. And I think that is something that we need to keep in mind as we go forward. And it is something that will come up in the finance negotiations, both in terms of the negotiations for the new quantified deal. It'll come up in the stocktake, means of implementation, and then, of course, as the rules of Paris get defined. So that's important to keep in mind. Anything else we need to add? We'd like to add on India's position before I move to two other questions I have. Akshat, Rohini, no?
No.
Okay. So just to wrap this up, from our perspective, I think India it's a very crucial COP. It's not a COP that needs to be taken lightly. It's a crucial COP because it'll frame the rules for the future. It'll set the framing for future cooperation. Therefore, in our view, India's role in playing a very important role, must play a very important role in deciding the terms of the global stocktake. The global stocktake must be based on equity, on historical emissions, but it also must be based on ambition moving forward. We cannot say that we do not want to move ahead. From the events that we have just shown you, we are very vulnerable as any other part of the world, which means that we want effective climate action. But this is why the means of implementation, the financial discussions, need to be at the core of the global stocktake. That what will be the means of implementation, and that's where we need to go beyond climate finance. Avantika told us that the OECD report, and I would still say to you, take it with a pinch of salt or many pinches of salt, because as yet we do not know what the methodology is for calculating what has constituted climate finance. But let's say for a moment it is already reached 89 billion or even 100 billion. OECD's own report tells us that the bulk of this is coming as loans and as grant, and not as grants. Now, in the fact that the most vulnerable countries are further hit by climate change and they therefore are under debt, data is very clearly showing us that most countries, the most vulnerable countries, are spending almost a quarter of their national revenue in debt servicing. Now, if climate finance adds to that debt burden, it does not mean that the world is going to be safer. So the means of implementation in the GST framework will be critical. And I think that's a key role that India needs to play. As the G20 president, we have raised these issues. These issues have been flagged. We also have had an MDB reform agenda. All that needs to be a very strong voice at the GST so that the outcome is one which is both equitable as well as ambitious. Okay, I have a few more questions. Let me take those. So Dinesh is asking, where does India stand on the 2030 agenda after 8 years, and what will our defense be at COP28? Who wants to take this? Avantika, you have been taking stock of where India is in terms of its track record.
Yes.
What are our NDCs firstly, and where do we stand with them?
So first in
Paris
2015,
NDCs.
Yes, that's right. So first in 2015, India submitted a 3-part goal to the UNFCCC. So India committed that it would reduce emissions intensity of its economy by 33 to 35% below 2005 levels. It would have 40% of installed non-fossil power capacity by 2030. And it would create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 gigatons through additional forest and tree cover by 2030. Following that, India submitted an updated pledge because the Paris Agreement has something called a ratcheting mechanism where the targets that you set, you have to make them more ambitious every 5 years. So in fact, last year in 2022, India did make 2 of its goals more ambitious. It revised the emissions intensity target upwards to 45% reduction by 2030. And it revised the non-fossil power capacity target to 50% by 2030. Our analysis shows that on emissions intensity, based on the National GHG Inventory of 2016, India had already achieved about 24% emission intensity reduction between 2005 and 2016. And it is on track to achieve more than 40% by 2030. So it looks like we are on track to achieve this target. On the installed non-fossil power capacity target, as of March 2023, we have already achieved 43% installed capacity of non-fossil power. So the CEA's projection for 2030 shows that we will actually be on track to have 64% installed non-fossil power capacity when you count nuclear as well. So we're on track to overachieve on this target.
But that's a forecast. Yeah. No, that's a forecast. The CEA
it's a forecast by the CEA.
Yeah. As a forecast. Right now, what we have is achieved the target because we have hydel, we have wind, we have solar in the combination as of today. right?
Right.
But we don't
we
know
had-
where we will stand in 2060 because we also have a new announcement on thermal power. We also have a new announcement on, so that I guess India will give us a new plan. The government will give us a plan going forward.
Right.
But as of today, it's good news because it was a target that we were close to achieving when we announced it, and we have achieved it.
That's right.
Okay, I have a question from on loss and damage. Will the COP be able to take a decision on damage and compensation for affected countries? Now, loss and damage was looked at by Akshat.
Yes, ma'am. So it is a very tenuous agreement that has been reached on the recommendations that have gone to the COP after the fifth transitional committee meeting. And even the fifth transitional committee meeting was basically put together at the last moment because the fourth transitional committee had failed to come to a consensus. So currently, the main contention is the World Bank being the interim host of the loss and damage fund. The secretariat is going to be hosted by the World Bank for 4 years, and the developing countries have put forth a lot of conditions on the World Bank to become the host of the loss and damage fund. And if these conditions are renegotiated, it is going to be very, very tough to come to another agreement because a lot of compromise has happened from the developing countries to basically even basically ask the World Bank or get World Bank involved in the loss and damage fund because the very character of the World Bank is not fit for the loss and damage fund, and that is what the developing countries have been arguing all through the TC meetings, the transitional committee meetings. So if it's renegotiated, it's going to be very, very tough to come to another agreement, and we just need to see how it's negotiated. It's going to be a very tough negotiation, and
but as of now, Akshat, as
yes,
of now, our hope is that this could be one big development coming out of COP.
Yes.
If
Yes.
it is not renegotiated, then there is a loss and damage fund, and
Yes.
there is money being promised by countries. Yes. So you may just see that the loss and damage piece of the COP is something
Yes.
that we could hold up as a gain of Dubai. The question would be how fast the money will flow to countries, what will be the terms of the compensation. Those are the rules that will have to be made. But yes. I think, but that's clearly, as you say, if the boat is not rocked further, and if the agreement, this tenuous agreement, is not reopened.
Yes.
And that's, the US played a very big role in walking out, and they may just end up with reopening the
agreement. that is where the negotiations will basically start, because the US at the end of the TC5 meeting basically walked out of the consensus. So US is not part of the consensus on the loss and damage recommendations. So that is where the negotiations are going to start, and let's see where it goes from there. But if it does happen, if the loss and damage fund is established, it's going to be a big win for the developing countries because it will get operationalized and money will come in.
Thank you, Akshat. Vaishnavi, very important question. Vaishnavi is asking on the recent revelations about the oil deals being stuck by, this is the BBC and the Guardian and others have put out reports today on the oil deals by the host nation on the sidelines. Anybody wanting to comment, or should I come in on this?
Ma'am, you'll be best positioned to comment on this.
Okay. Vaishnavi, I don't know much about, I've seen the reports, and it's very interesting for me how the Western media jumps on to the question about fossil fuels in our part of the world. I saw a report by The Guardian about Saudi Arabia and the deal with South Africa on oil and gas. And the fact is, oil and gas has actually increased in the US. The UK is today talking about new drilling in the North Sea. We are talking about massive exploration happening in the developed part of the world. We are also seeing that the US is today our largest exporter, our largest producer of oil and gas in the world. It's making deals post the Ukraine war with just about every country in the world to try and sell their oil and gas. So I just find it very interesting that the Western media finds these issues finds these issues. I mean, to me, it speaks of the hypocrisy of the Western media. We definitely need to get out of oil and gas. We need a phase out of oil and gas, but we need it first in the developed world. And we are not seeing that happen at all. And that's not being called upon at all. We are talking about South Africa, which needs development, which needs electricity. And from everything you've heard from us, the money that South Africa got in what it's called the JET-P, the Just Energy Transition, only added to South Africa's burden on debt. So I think it's very important for us to understand that we are in one world and not two worlds. And as much as the war has shown us that there are two worlds and two narratives, I hope in climate we can avoid that, and the media can at least understand and bridge the gap by being able to explain a point of view that comes from our perspective. So I don't know the details of these deals, but I can only say that the story seems to be very, very interesting to come at this time when a number of other stories about the oil and gas developments don't seem to make it to the Western media. Okay, Neil has asked a question on states require 293 billion, a report by Amber, on financing to triple renewable energy capacity and to align it with the net zero scenarios proposed by the IEA. India needs an additional financing of 100 billion, which is beyond its reach. What is your take on this? Who wants to take this on?
I can start and also pull in Seher and Trishant to give additional comments.
Please.
I'll just take a quick second. So I do apologize. One of my slides got deleted on mitigation. And this COP28 is...
Okay, people, I'm just seeing there are lots of questions. So keep it short, okay? I'm going to run out of time.
I'll keep it very short.
The list.
There's going to be a push to have a tripling of renewable energy capacity by 2030, doubling of energy efficiency efforts by 2030, and language around phase out of fossil fuels is being pushed by some parties. So this was under mitigation. Under this, financing is a big header, and particularly for developing countries like India, do require financing to enable this tripling of RE capacity. India's NDC alone requires something like $170 billion per year in financing, and currently only 1/4 of those needs are being met. So this rapid RE phase up is going to require more concessional finance, which currently emerging economies are really not getting. Our report Beyond Climate Finance has focused on the issue of high cost of capital, which developing countries are experiencing, having to pay something like 10 to 12% on interest rates on loans. This problem needs to be addressed. Trishant, if I can draw you in very quickly on the mitigation work program and what it said on this issue in the two dialogues that occurred very quickly.
So the investment in renewable energy was a topic in the Bonn climate conference this year. And one of the things that was highlighted was the regional disparity in investment. If you see the per capita investment in clean energy in South Asia is $7 as against $174 in North America. So that's a huge difference in clean energy investment. And that is something that the mitigation work program included as a concern in its discussions at Bonn.
Also, if I may add, Avantika, for Neil, one of the other big issues we do need the money, but that's where the terms of financing have to be agreed upon. Because the other thing that we had brought out, if you remember, a few months ago, and we've reiterated it now for COP, is the issue of the cost of capital. So if you want renewable energy to come in countries like India and in Africa, you will need the cost of capital to be low. Now, because of the higher risk that is perceived in our countries, the cost of capital is high. So our loans, we get at 10 to 12%. Africa gets it at 20%. Countries in Europe would get it at 1 to 2, 3%. Greece would get it at 4%. So that makes the projects unviable. So all these things are part of the discussions of what we are calling beyond climate finance. But you're absolutely right. India will need money to meet its renewable energy target, and we should be loud and clear about this at COP. Okay, I have from Salim Sheikh. There will be a lot of push by G77 countries, including India. What hopes can be from this COP28 negotiation regarding the fund to get practically going for developing countries? Will there be financial flows by rich countries at a speed needed to meet the disastrous impacts of climate change in resource poor development countries? Salim, if I may answer this on behalf of my colleagues, because we're running short of time. You can see from our finance papers that we've put out, the point that you're making is absolutely valid. This is a crucial issue. Finance is a make or break. But it's not just about climate finance and $100 billion. It's about the nature of finance. It's the cost of capital. It's about, exactly as we've just said, where is the investment for renewable energy going? What are the terms of that finance? If that finance, for instance, after the Pakistan floods, there was a lot of global money and a lot of attention on Pakistan. But as you will see from our document, the money that came to Pakistan came as debt, came as equity, now came as loans. What does that do to a debt-rich country? It only makes it even more tougher. So those are the issues that we are basically saying are critical, and therefore the financial flows are a make or break. They need to come at speed, but they need to come with the new terms of agreement so that they are low, they're grant, and they're concessional. Okay, I have many questions. Indian industry, Krishan Kumar on the role of common people in reducing the climate change, links, Akriti on the challenges, Kenneth on Western media full of criticism of developed world. Kenneth, I don't think that is the case. I don't think then we are living in two different planets. I don't think there is enough pressure from the rich world to put a halt on the hypocrisy of its governments investing massively in oil and gas exploration. And after the Ukraine war, the entire move of the Western world to even get to Africa to ask for oil and gas to be reopened, I don't think the Western media was able to hold their governments to account. They are proud that they hold governments to account. They're certainly not. So it's not a polarizing narrative at all. I think it's a chance for us to get our narrative out. And I hope that will make sure that the polarization stops. Shishti is asking about methane emissions. Avantika, I want to bring you in on this. How do they play out with respect to India?
So the US is pushing on a focus on methane emissions in a major way. Particularly this year, the focus is on financing for the reduction of methane emissions with a focus on the oil and gas sector. So the US, President Biden launched a challenge ahead of a few months ago on raising some $200 billion in financing by COP28. And then the US State Department is now suggesting that that challenge has been met, but it's a little unclear who the actors or parties involved in that are. Definitely, methane will be in focus because now China has also come out with a methane reduction plan, although there are no clear numerical targets in the plan and it lacks some robustness. India in particular, it plays a limited role in methane emissions for the simple fact that our methane emissions majority of it comes from the agricultural sector, which is survival emissions to a large extent. It's from rice cultivation, from livestock, and our view really is that the focus needs to be on luxury emissions from the oil and gas sector attached to consumption in the developed part of the world. So that's really what our publications also focus on. And that's also the perspective that India is likely to bring in any negotiations which discuss methane.
Good. Arul Ratiman is asking, what can be done to ensure India's fair share in remaining carbon budget? What is your advice for the Indian civil society, political parties? Arul, my advice simply would be that we need to stay strong on this issue, but we need to also make sure that we don't use this as a way to deny the need for action. The fact is, we have our pie diagram that we showed you on the distribution of the global carbon budget shows you very clearly that India is, with its large population, will just have about 4% of the global carbon budget by 2030, even at business as usual today, with the NDCs, which we are saying are not ambitious enough. Now, this means that India is definitely has to be a country which puts forward the view of equity and the need for development of the countries of the South. It needs to make sure that in the GST, the issue of historical emissions and fair burden sharing is part of the agreement moving forward. But India also needs to make sure that we have a plan which is to find ways that in which our low carbon future, our co-benefits of reducing greenhouse gases is articulated, that we can put a price tag on it. We can look at what can we do as a country and what are the hard to abate sectors, what are the difficult options, what is the cost of that, so that we can actually have a plan to move forward. And to do that in a way that has ambition attached to it. We at CSE had believed that the Indian government's position, when we had said that we will decrease our coal use, and even as we double our energy consumption, our increase will come on renewable, clean energy. But that, as Trishant said, and as we answered, will also, Neil's question, will require additional financing. Now, that's the position of the Indian government, which shows that we are serious about climate change, that we want to take ambitious action, but it has a price tag, and that we need the means of implementation, the financing to be able to implement it. That's what we feel should be India's position. And our advice to the Indian civil society would simply be that these are the positions that need to go together. We cannot ask for a fair share without putting out also a plan to reduce emissions with ambition and making sure that we can show the world that we mean business as well. And that's the dual role that we need to play. Sukumaran, methane. We do not see huge methane emissions from numerous So Sukumaran, it is an issue, but there is no data on it. We have actually just put together a report on methane from dump sites. Please take a look at it. And my concern is that, yes, in India as well as the rest of the world, broadly, methane comes from 3 sources: oil and gas, 1/3, agriculture, 1/3, waste, 1/3. Now, in India as well, we need better report card on this. But in India, the agriculture, livestock sector is big. Waste will, of course, be a major issue. And we, as an Indian government strategy, the good thing is that we are talking about no waste dump sites. We are talking about remediation of the existing waste dump sites, but we do not have good methodology to calculate our current emissions and therefore the benefits that we will get from remediating the sites. And that's clearly something that we hope will happen more. So I think that's really what I can see. Shuparno, I'm over 4 minutes on my deadline. Is there any question, Shuparno, that you feel I have missed out at some point? Shuparno?
Yeah, I was looking at something in the chat box.
Okay.
And there is something by Rajat C. I mean, it just seemed interesting to me because it kind of relates to the stuff that we are doing. So BBC and CNN push the West's narrative onto India's impressionable youth. So Rajat is asking, could CSE collaborate with WION or First Post, for example, to achieve the same effect on West's youth?
I
Would
don't
you
think
like to?
I think there are inequalities in the world we should accept, but I think we should definitely keep doing the best we can. We put out our point of view as clearly as we can. We work with media, we work with children, we work with our people so that we can put these points of view across. And I think that has to be the positions that we do. But I have from someone in Karachi, Pakistan, I want to take that as the final. I cannot not take that. So this is from Sugra Tunio from Karachi. Reigning fossil fuels and carbon emissions are expected to top the agenda. But don't you think the international funding to help vulnerable countries adapt to climate change must be hotly debated and demand more contributions? Absolutely, Sugra. But let me ask Akshit, who's been following adaptation, to give you an insight of just how poor the adaptation negotiations are. So yes, we need more money, but we cannot even agree on what we mean by adaptation today. Akshit?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, as you rightly said, adaptation negotiations, especially the development, establishment of the GGA framework, has been the weakest part of the negotiations till now. And the country target indicators how we are going to.
Akshit, sorry, your line is gone. Can somebody else? Akshit, can you try again?
Akshit, you can switch off your video and just use the audio.
Yeah, just give us a quick answer on this. I'm sure.
Yes. So basically said the negotiations on adaptation, on basically the global goal adaptation, are the weakest because countries have not been able to agree upon what exactly adaptation means, to assess it, how to determine determine high-level targets, determine national level targets, all of it. And the main contention in the negotiations part is the means of implementation. The developing countries a means of implementation to be part of all the aspects of the framework, and countries have been pushing it, not agreeing to those aspects being of the GGA framework. So, and as we have already talked about gap, quote.
So Akshit, your line is very poor, and I'm short of time. Yeah, audio is a problem. So Sugra, let me give you a quick answer on this. My colleagues are all here. They will be available as the COP moves on. But just a quick answer. See, I don't think we should say that mitigation should not be discussed. Mitigation is critical. We need to reduce emissions. We cannot have a world that is breaching 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, 3 degrees centigrade rise. Please understand, at 1.1 degrees centigrade rise, this is the nature of the extreme weather events that we are seeing in our part of the world and across the world, which means that mitigation is key. And mitigation means that we need investment in our world to be able to not first emit and then clean up, as has been the trajectory of the Western world. But equally, we need money for adaptation. We need money for loss and damage. Now, this is where the Western narrative, and I was challenged by a colleague, Kenneth, who said that this was a polarizing debate. Kenneth, please understand from our point of view just how completely at loss we are to even explain to you the fact that here are countries of the world suffering, here are countries of the world at loss, and the countries who should be taking emission reduction are talking about increasing emissions. And today, if South Africa gets an investment in gas, it becomes a front page news without asking about the fact that where is the money that South Africa needs for its transition to renewable energy. I would have appreciated that story if it had both parts of it, but it didn't. And I think that's the bottom line of climate change, the science of it and the politics of it. So I hope you all will forgive us as we say it as it is. But I hope that also explains to you how tough the next 2 weeks will be. My final word will be that all the data that you saw is available on our website. Please take a look at it. My colleagues that you can see on the screen, some of them will be at COP. Their emails are also on the website. Please get in touch if you need any clarification, any issues. Shuparno, you will be following up the negotiations from Delhi. And if you could give us a quick conclusion in terms of what you'll be doing from here, that would help.
Right. So our entire climate, COP28 team is here, and we are going to be reporting directly from there on a daily basis. So we have put up a full page on the Center for Science and Environment website, as well as Down to Earth will be reporting on a daily basis, and both the sites are connected. So you'll find a whole lot of information, videos, analysis, articles, etc. on that. You can easily access that. And of course, I and Sukanya will be working here. We are accessible as always. Please do reach out to us whenever you need any help. Avantika is our points person in Dubai when the COP goes on. In case you can't reach her because she might be in and out of meetings and all, we are here to help you out.
Okay. So before I end, Prakash, absolutely, we need a reassessment of India's agricultural contribution to GHG emissions. And I think that's where we have to get our own science, our own data right, so that we can negotiate with confidence as we move ahead. And I think that's something that we hope will happen as we move on. So Shuparno, thank you so much for this. Thank you for organizing it. Thank you, Sukanya, for the effort that you put in to organize this. And thank you, team, for all the material that you have put out. I hope this will help us all understand. Yes, Shuparno,
I
please.
just needed to make one more announcement for any Hindi, journalists who are writing in Hindi, who are probably here today with us. Please do join us again on December 5th, where we will be doing a special edition of Manthan 10, the briefings that we do for Hindi journalists. Please do join us on the same issue, COP28, but we'll be following up on what is happening there. Trishant, who's here, will be taking us through the ropes. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuparno. Thank you, Sukanya. Thank you, everybody. And I hope this COP we can have some developments that we're all happy with. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.